Good evening, everybody. It is just about a little after, actually, 6:30 on Wednesday, July 17th, and it is a pleasure to talk to all of you again. Thank you so much for coming over and watching and or listening to part 4 of the Amp Jack Guide. And today we are going to tackle the astronomical fields of the 750 and higher price category. We're talking at least $750 and well above $1,100. We're going to go through some of this stuff, and frankly, you'll find that maybe it's not worthwhile to save up $3,500 for a particular unit in this category. Well, we'll see. Let's get started, shall we? To infinity and beyond. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about paying a lot of money for arguably minor improvements amongst the units in this price category. I'm not talking about an $1,100 unit compared to a $250 unit. That's not the comparison. I'm talking about a $750 and higher comparison. Sometimes you're not getting a whole lot more for paying 2 or 3 times more the price. And these items are not really, I would say, for casual or hobby use, more for the professional and enthusiast. And when you're putting down that much money, I don't know if a hobbyist is really going to put down that much money, $3,500, for example, for one item. Professionals might, enthusiasts might, casual listeners and hobbyists, very unlikely. Items with a lot of features sometimes are the same price as items with no additional features. So sometimes you'll find something that is $1,100 that's got a lot of features involved, and you'll see a $1,500 unit that has none of the features in the $1,100 unit, and you will say to yourself, why is this $400 more than the $1,100 device? That would be a good question to ask. So the more price you pay doesn't mean that you're getting more features for the item. We'll discuss this in a few minutes. Let's talk about portables in this price range, $750 and up. Are they worth it? What, would you pay over $500 for a portable device? I don't know. Would you pay that? Possibly for significant feature upgrades from the sub $500 units, from the sub $750 units. Would you do that? If you get, cleaner implementation of the DAC and the amp, if you get additional features like more filters, you get balanced output, you get a much more stable device, all in all, better build quality, maybe. And certainly if you want bragging rights, if you want to go on HeadFi and start a thread and say, I got this thing for $4,000, then sure, maybe it would be worth it for you. But for anybody else who doesn't tick off these marks here, these categories, then probably not. But what do you get with these typical portables? Standalone and combos. We're just going to lump them together here. Well, the type around here, you get about the i5 Micro IDSD Pro. No, I know. This is not $750 technically and above. It's $600. I get it. But this is, I think, a worthwhile comparison because I will show you in a moment. I will argue to you in a moment why paying more doesn't necessarily bring you more. So you have the IDSD Black Label for $600. The Chord Hugo 2, which is the biggest, the big brother of the Mojo, for about $2,000. The Sony PHA-3 for $1,000, and the Aroma A100 for $640. What do you get with pricey portables? Well, sometimes, or more often than not, you get native PCM and DSD support. You can drive up to 600 ohm headphones, and that's a typical feature. You tend to have balanced outputs along with the 3.5 millimeter. But you don't necessarily get more significant filter options, if any additional filter options, when you compare to the lower models. And I shall give you an example. The PHA-3 from Sony is a portable amplifier. It's got a handful of filters you can add, a bass boost and things like that, but it's $1,000. What is the justification for that versus, a FIO for $350? You're going to have to decide. Now, is it better components on the inside? Does it look better to you? With bragging rights, as I said before? Who knows? But just because an item costs 3 times as much doesn't mean you're getting 3 times the features or 3 times better the experience. And to go back real quickly, since we're on this topic, the i5 Micro IDSD Black Label has a ton of features. technically, it's portable since you can put it in a bag very easily in your back pocket, I suppose, if you have a big enough back pocket, and carry it around from location to location, use all of its features, all its connection options, all its filter options. But in comparison to the $1,000 PHA-3, the Black Label would mop the floor with the PHA-3 because of all the features the Black Label has that the Sony doesn't. I would possibly argue the same sort of thing with the Hugo 2, but the Hugo 2 has some additional features that may not be present in the Black Label. But is it really worth it to you to spend $1,500 more for the Hugo 2 over the Black Label? Maybe, maybe not. And then you have the Aroma A100. And if you go check out the Aroma A100, you will find, I think, that the Black Label at $40 cheaper MSRP is probably more feature-full than the Aroma itself. So paying more doesn't necessarily mean you get more. So what's the point? Well, as I said before, maybe the iFi is justified by its multitude of connections and filter options. And the more pricey from there, like the Sony, it's hard to justify those things, especially if Sony itself does not provide sufficient information as to why the PHA-3 costs $1,000. Generally, the marketing is that these units are specifically engineered for better performance. But that's also speculative and subjective. If you go on HeadFi and you look for a review on any particular of these audiophile products, more often than not, if you go through the thread, you will find that some individuals jump all over somebody else who happens to have a contrary view. If you show up on that thread and you say, I have this and I don't like it, or I don't think this is really worth it, then some people are going to take you to town over that comment. They will deride you and they will say, you're wrong and we're right. This thing is the best thing ever. And that all comes back to the subjective portion. You may very well feel that what you paid for sounds fantastic and it's the best thing ever. And that's a good thing because you paid money for it. But everybody else doesn't have to agree with you. So that's why it's speculative and subjective when people and companies say specifically engineered for better performance. We'll leave that to the individual who pays the money. Are these portables for professionals? Well, possibly the iFi, as we talked about. But when you compare the feature sets, especially with the iFi, for example, it's hard to justify such a price hike for the lack of features. And hobbyists and casual users need to be aware that just because they see a Sony PHA-3 for $750 doesn't mean that they're going to get better experience or more features when they compare it to the Black Label, just because the thing is more expensive. And have you considered DAPs instead, digital audio players? When you get into this price bracket, $750 and higher, you can talk about now, flagship DAPs for $800 or $900 or $1,500, or if you're Sony, like $3,500. Sony has this bad habit of just hiking up the price to ridiculous amounts. But if you go down that road, what do you get? So let's assume for the sake of argument that you are looking for something that's $750 or higher, and you're thinking, I need something portable. Why would you not choose one of these other portables over a DAP, disregarding the Black Label, which is unique in what it does? Well, portables, some have multiple connection options, like the iFi, but they don't have a screen, and you pay a premium price, and they're hard to find for cheap. Every once in a while on eBay, you'll find them for cheap, and sometimes you'll find them for cheap on US Audio Mart or sites of that caliber. But DAPs, even though they have a limited connection, they also come with balanced headphone output, especially in this price range, flagship DAPs. They come with high-res screens, Android OS or Linux or some other proprietary form of an operating system, a plethora of DAC and amp modules galore. If you feel as if you really need something with a 4497 EQ from AKM, then okay, you will absolutely find a DAP that has one of those things. If you are looking for another specific type of DAC module, yes, you will very likely have an option out there for you. The difference between portables and DAPs is that the DAPs, you can take your music anywhere you want. And if you have a portable, you should probably ask yourself, what do I need a portable for in this price range? Do I need it to connect to a multitude of devices at home and at my workplace, or if I'm on the road? Then perhaps the iFi is of consideration. Do I need the most power possible? Then, okay, then perhaps there's an alternative. But I would submit that the KNC5, which we talked about yesterday, or in the last video at least, the KNC5 puts out 800 milliwatts at 32 ohms. That's pretty powerful. But really, if you are looking for the best bang for your money at this price range for portables, would it make more sense to you to buy or consider a DAP over a standalone portable amp DAC or portable amplifier? What about typical desktop amps in this price range? Well, there's the King Rex HQ1 for $900, the Past Labs HPA1 for $3,500. That's right, I said $3,500, $2,500. The Musical Fidelity MX HPA for $1,000, the SPL Phonitor E for $1,700, and the Burson Conductor V2 for $1,000. Now, the Phonitor is well regarded in the audiophile community by many people. And the Phonitor SPL makes a whole line, not just the Phonitor E, but much more expensive units that have balanced, and they have DAC implementations and all sorts of stuff. That may be of consideration if you are an enthusiast or a professional. The Burson Conductor, I would say, is also an interesting proposition because theoretically you could change the op amp in that unit. It's very well built, and it gets some very, very good reviews. It's built, I believe it's in Australia, and it's a very small company. But you'll find out that these very pricey units are built by smaller companies. What do you get with these desktop amps in this price range? Sometimes you get separate power supplies. And why would you want a separate power supply? Well, you want to do a separate power supply if you want to minimize noise and distortion. Now, that power supply will generate a lot of electromagnetic interference inside the unit itself, if it was inside. And that means that you would have to find a way to shield all the other components. It might mean that you have to limit the type of components that you can actually put in there. So having a separate power supply means that you cut out a lot of that interference. Yes, maybe it's only a difference of a millimeter or two as you stack the power supply underneath the amplifier unit itself. But that minor separation with the metal housing might be just enough for the company to implement other features inside the amplification unit itself and not have to worry about shielding as much, and be able to either simplify the circuitry or add circuitry, modules, whatever they want to do, without the fear that the power supply is going to interfere with the implementation. A lot of these desktop amps in this section, in this price range, are Class A amplifiers. They provide both balanced and unbalanced connections, but they're not always as powerful, even though they're Class A. I'll give you an example. The Past Labs HPA1, it starts at 3.5 watts into 20 ohms. Now that sounds amazing, right? Amazing. But then it drops to 200 milliwatts at 300 ohms. 200 milliwatts into 300 ohms. Now, frankly, if you compare the Magni 3 from Shit, that would beat the HPA1 from Past Labs. And so just because you pay an astronomical amount, Past Labs $3,500, doesn't mean you get more for your money. In this price range, you also get exotic wiring and better internals. Exotic wiring, what do I mean? Oh, silver cabling, maybe. You know, copper cabling inside. Copper is cheaper than silver. You may have a hand-built unit that is done with such precision that it would awe-strike you. Awestruck? It would godsmack you. How much time and effort went into making that particular unit. They get better shielded components for the most part to reduce interference. And, yeah, sometimes they have more robust transformers, more robust power units, cleaner power units. Therefore, trying to keep the whole implementation from start to end clean and with as little distortion as possible. So are you actually getting better sound? It's very subjective, very contentious. No doubt there are more pricey internals in the more costly units, but that doesn't mean you're getting noticeably better quality sound. You may not hear the difference. One thing you might be able to hear is quantifiably less noise compared to significantly cheaper alternatives, but then you have to decide, is the astronomical hike in price worth it for a little bit less noise? And if you have an amplifier or a portable that is really noisy, it's probably time to find an alternative. But jumping up to this price range of $750 or higher without taking a look or considering something much more intermediate might be a fault. It may not be the best way to proceed. What about desktop DACs? Typical desktop DACs in this price range. There's the Auralic Altair for $1,900, the Musical Fidelity M6S for $1,800, and the Mytek Liberty for $1,000. Now, Musical Fidelity makes a range of units, amplifiers, and DACs, and they are fairly well regarded if you go and you research them. The Auralic is very well regarded in the audiophile community, in the enthusiast community. The Mytek Liberty is also very well regarded. The Mytek is made in New York. I believe it's in New York, but it's at least on the East Coast of the United States. And really, Mytek's units are geared towards enthusiasts and professionals. These are reference class units for the large part. What do you get with these desktop DACs? You get MQA and DSD support. You get some streaming options, so you can get a DAC that has the ability to stream whatever it is being played to another unit, a separate amplifier that is capable of receiving streaming support or streaming files. Some offer really good master clocks. What's a master clock? Well, master clock times the waveform as it's being transferred from the source, say your computer, to the amplifier and eventually to your headphone. Every once in a while, if you have, it sounds like the music is very momentarily jittery, dropping in and out. It's a little choppy. It might be because the master clock is not doing its job or there's something interfering with the master clock. Companies do sell master clocks separately, so you can have a master clock control everything, but those are also very expensive. The master clock is a step up for sure, but is it worth the additional price hike to get a very good master clock? And just that, if that's all you're looking for, maybe it's better if you look at just the standalone master clock if you're happy with everything else in your setup. Finally, with these desktop DACs, you get very high sampling rates at around 32 bits at 764 kilohertz. So, do you definitely need the expensive DAC? No, absolutely not. You don't definitely need anything. Although there are some verifiable differences compared to significantly cheaper alternatives, it's not necessarily a wise investment on return. Meaning, spending $3,500 for a unit, or $1,500 for a unit, or $1,800 for a unit may not result in amazing sound difference for you. Especially if that means that you don't have an amazing source. Your file is compressed and all weirdly recorded. Your headphones are a cheap headphone that you bought on Amazon for $50. The investment on return may not be what you expect if all your other components are lacking. Higher bitrate in kilohertz may not be noticeable depending on your system and file. So even though a particular unit might be able to play 32-bit at 764 kilohertz, if you don't have the right file format, if your sound file, if your music file is heavily compressed or distorted, if you have a lot of interference in the connection, if you have cheap headphones, then the high bit rate in the kilohertz is not going to do a miracle and suddenly make a cheap, terrible recording experience sound phenomenal. What's the catch with expensive stacks? By stacks, I mean expensive amplifier, expensive DAC separately. If you decide to purchase expensive separate units, remember that your entire system will determine the sound output. As I said, cheap amplifier coupled with expensive DAC may not give you these superlative results that you expect, and vice versa. Getting a cheap DAC and an expensive amplifier. But as I said before in the last several videos, getting a cheap DAC doesn't mean you're getting cheap sound. If you can find a DAC that is clean, that has the features that you want, say DSD support, for $150 or $250, what would give you the impetus to go and spend $1,800 on another DAC? If that cheaper DAC does the job, then perhaps it would be wiser to just save your money on the cheaper unit. But clearly, if you have a cheap unit that is just faulty and is not made well and is noisy and it doesn't have a good master clock, for example, then yeah, getting an expensive amplifier will not change that. Finally, we also talked about cheap headphones coupled with expensive stacks is probably not going to make you happy either. And prepare to match pairs, meaning buying MQA DSD capable DAC is of little benefit if you don't have the supported files. If you've burned files from a CD and you've encoded them as MP3, you're going to hear an MP3 file. And no amount of MQA and DSD support is going to change that to any significant benefit. Upscaling to DSD like an all to DSD option is cheating and won't do miracles to a bad recording. Let's talk about typical combos in this price range. And the first and foremost, the one I'm listening to right now, is the RME ADI2 for about $1,100. The MyTech Brooklyn DAC Plus for $2,200. The Plus means that it's not only an amplifier, but it's also a DAC. The Sennheiser HDVD 800 for $1,800, or the Sony very well labeled TAZH1ES, rolls off the tongue, for $1,800. The AK Astral & Kern Acro L1000 for $900, and the Project Prebox RS for $1,500. What do you expect from these, or what can you expect from these desktop combos? Generally, a very good implementation of an amp DAC, right? Easily able to drive 300 ohms. You get multiple input connections, SPDIF, USB, AES, and RCA, coaxial, obviously. Sometimes you get IEM-specific output. For example, the RME ADI2 has not only the headphone out, but it also has, like the typical quarter-inch headphone out, but it also has IEM implementation. And when you plug in the IEM, the RME already knows, a lot of acronyms here, the RME already knows, hey, I got to turn down the volume so that the IEMs that are very sensitive don't blow the drivers. Very low noise. There's one thing you can say for these much pricier units is that these companies do an exceptional job of trying, maybe not always succeeding, but trying to keep the noise and distortion to a minimum. Some of these units have multiple headphone outputs, like the Sennheiser HDVD 800 and also the 820, as well as the Sony Tasman. I don't know, I forget what is it called? TAZH1ES. That has multiple headphone outs. And many marketed as reference class units. For example, like the HDVD 800, it's marketed as being specifically for the HD 800, which is a reference class headphone. And so in order to get the true reference class experience, you should obviously couple it with the Sennheiser unit for $1,800. I'm being facetious if you hadn't noticed. I'm not being serious about that. Let's talk about expensive combos versus affordable combos. What exactly are you paying extra for? Well, typically multiple headphone outputs, not demonstrably better sound quality across the board, but maybe to some people noticeable. More expensive units compete to provide lowest distortion, as I said. EQ and filter, typical in expensive models in these combos. Some form of LCD screen tends to be the trend, but it's not always guaranteed. And usually, you're paying a whole lot for the name. That's where the crux is. Especially with Sony, which has, as I said before, a tendency to overprice all of its products. Sennheiser does it. Audio-Technica does it. Like all these big companies, even the smaller companies, they put a lot of stock in their name. And they ratchet up the price because you're paying that much more for a coveted, according to them, a coveted name. Who should consider expensive combos? Anybody if you've got the money. Hell, if you have the money, you can consider whatever you like. But really, this is geared towards enthusiasts or professionals who need the most neutral, cleanest sound possible, and they're eking out every last ounce of clean sound, of neutral sound, of reference class sound. Further, this is for individuals who will know how to use the extra software features. For example, with the RME ADI2, who will know exactly how to use the EQ functionality in the system, who will know how to use all the other functions involved with the RME. If you're just going out to buy the RME because everybody's hyping it, then, maybe it's not for you. Maybe you're just trying to buy the name so you can tell people, I now have the RME, and you're not buying it because you actually think it might be of some necessity to you. If you intend to mate expensive units with poorly recorded, compressed audio and or cheap non-audiophile headphones, you're kind of just wasting the money. Start to finish, you have to make sure that everything from beginning to end is complementary to everything else. A failure point in one of these lines, one of these links in the chain, is going to give you less good sound than you would if you had good implementation across the chain. Let's talk about tube or hybrid amplifiers. Because at this price range, tube and hybrid amplifiers become more and more ubiquitous. There's the Felix Audio Euphoria for $2,600, the Pathos Aureum for $1,300, the Vincent KHV1 for $1,000, and the Schiit Mjolnir for $900. And the Schiit Mjolnir really has come down in price over the last couple of years. But if you want a tube or a hybrid amplifier, these are some of the names that might come up for you. The Felix Audio Euphoria is a tube amplifier, all in all. The Pathos Aureum is kind of a hybrid. The Vincent KHV1 is a tube. The Schiit Mjolnir is a hybrid. What do you get with these tube hybrid amps for this price? Reportedly, you get better internal components. Silver cabling, better shielded power supplies, more robust internals, all the stuff we've already talked about. Often you get higher quality tubes. Now, you can contest that when it comes to Schiit, because they don't necessarily use the highest quality tubes, but certainly they pick tubes that they think would go well with their device. These companies tend to pick matched pairs. They have to pick matched pairs, otherwise you're going to get distorted sound. And these tubes are chosen for a particular sound characteristic, so it complements all the other components that they already have in these units, and that the tubes, if it's a hybrid unit, really does work coherently with the solid state portion. And if it's just a tube amplifier, that the company implements the tube that provides them the sound signature they are marketing. Finally, designs of these units just stand out. Some of these units are beautiful to behold to some people. Some of them are not. But one of the ways that these manufacturers try to get your attention is they can spend the extra time and the money to make their units stand out, and of course charge you for it. Is there a sound difference between cheap and expensive tube and hybrid amps? Well, it depends on the comparison. How cheap is the alternative? If your cheap alternative is, say, I don't know, $100 tube amplifier or a hybrid tube amplifier off of Amazon, Gosh, that's not really fair. I have personally purchased a $170 hybrid amplifier from Amazon from a Chinese company, no-name Chinese company, that turned out to be awful because you couldn't change the tubes. There was a significant amount of noise, and the power output on the headphone was insignificant. Comparing that to one of these other units, like the Pathos Aureum, for example, would be shameful for the cheaper version. Also, what tubes did you use to compare? There are times you can buy a good amplifier, tube amplifier, like the Dark Voice. And if you find a pair of tubes that is clean and it's warm sounding or whatever sound that you're looking for, and then you compare that perfect blend with, say, the Pathos Aureum or another expensive either tube or hybrid, you may not really be able to tell a huge difference. And that's the key. If you can't tell a huge difference between those two comparisons, what are you paying the extra money for? Your source material is also of concern. If your source material is highly compressed, it's not going to sound good, as always. And also the headphones that you use may impact the listening experience. There are some headphones that simply don't respond well to tubes and hybrids. The HD600s are really tube-friendly. They take tubes very well. There are some planar magnetic headphones that don't like tubes at all. They prefer solid state, just the way that they are, because of the architecture of the driver itself. It could be the impedance, could be the response, the decibel response. It could be the tubes that you use. It could be the source material. It could be a whole lot of factors involved. But not every headphone is going to appreciate, or you're not going to appreciate every headphone with a tube or a hybrid. You may not be able to hear a significant difference if you invest in high-quality tubes for a cheaper tube hybrid amp, as I said. Your DAC is neutral and clean, and your source file is high-res. So if all those things work in conjunction, you have a cheap unit, say the Dark Voice, in comparison, obviously, cheap unit, and you spent some additional money, a couple $100 to get really good, like excellent tubes that you like, and you have a DAC that's neutral and it's clean, and you're playing high-res files, and you have a good pair of headphones, is the difference enough for you to spend another, I don't know, $1,000 on top to buy something like the Aureum or the Felix Audio? That's, you can probably get something very close, if not better sometimes, arguably better, if you just tweak your system a little bit. Why buy expensive units? Okay, bottom line, why buy them? Professionals might need the more pristine audio components. You are an enthusiast with money to spare and are curious, and absolutely no other reason. I cannot find another reason. I personally can't think of any other reason for somebody to spend that type of money on these types of units unless you fall into one of these two categories, a professional or an enthusiast. If you're curious, if you're a hobbyist, if you're just casual, that's a lot of money to ask for. And if you aspire to spend this much money and you're a casual or a hobbyist, you should probably take a few moments and think about what it is that you're looking for and hone in on the particular device in this price range that gets you closest to your criteria. Because you don't want to keep spending money, especially in this price range. You don't want to keep spending money. You want to spend it once and be happy. As with every one of these reviews and as with every one of these guide videos, do your research. Because once you spend that money, either there's going to be a restocking fee if you don't like it, there's going to be a waste of time for sure, it's going to be a little bit of frustration probably, and if you can't return it for whatever reason, you're taking a hit on depreciation if you are able to sell it on eBay or US Audio Mart or some other website of similar nature. So be careful when you're going down this road, not just with the very expensive units, but also the more meagerly priced units. Okay, so that's it. That is the Amp DAC guide. We're at the end. This is it. Ultimately, where should you look? Okay, if you are a hobbyist, a casual listener, somebody who's just getting into this audiophile area, this field, clearly it's the best option to start off slow. Spending a little bit of money initially just to figure out if you really want to get into this field is probably the wiser way of going. And then once you understand what you want, the type of sound signature you like, the headphones you want to use, then hone in on that middle meaty ground. About $500 or so, or below. Going up to $750 or higher is really for those individuals who know exactly what they want, and they can't find that exact criteria in something less pricey. Or they're professionals. So middle ground, as typical, is the more reasonable one. You have the two extremes, the really cheap and then the really expensive, and somewhere in the middle, everybody else lives. That is my suggestion. And now, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Obviously, if you're of a reasonable mind, you will say, I'm not going to spend $3,500 on an amplifier that goes to 200 milliwatts at 300 ohms. That's ridiculous. Right, of course it is. Why wouldn't you just go for a portable amplifier that does 800 milliwatts at 32 ohms, like the KNC5? Why would I spend $2,600 for a Mytek Brooklyn DAC Plus when I can get something like, the Mass Drop 789 for $750 now on eBay, or the THX AAA from Monolith for about $500? At this point now, when you have the option of buying really excellent amplifiers and DACs for about the $500 range, I think it becomes less arguable to jump up in price as significantly as you would have to in order to buy something like the RME or the Orium or the Mytek. Because if you're looking for good sound, and I'm just saying good sound, not the best sound you can possibly afford, just good sound, you'll enjoy your music. You have a passion for it. That the middle ground is probably where you should look. This has just been my opinion. Take it or leave it, like it or not. It's totally up to you. I hope that this guide series has been somewhat helpful. It's been trying to distill everything, all that information out there, trying to make sense of all this stuff. But frankly, there's so much option, so many options available to people, that it's not that easy. It's not as simple as saying, that's the thing you should buy. Everybody's different. Everybody's sound preferences are different. Everybody's price range is different. And so you should do your own research, and you should ask questions, and you should take everything with a grain of salt and use your own common sense and rationale when you make these buying decisions. Next, we're going to do a quick comparison of MQA and DSD, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I mean, what's the deal with MQA and DSD? Those acronyms keep popping up. What is it? Well, I'm going to do a little bit of a video and give you a distilled version of what MQA and DSD are. And at the end, I suspect you're going to say, oh, that's all? That's right. That's all. MQA and DSD coming up next time, and we will continue the review process of the Neumanns eventually when the Allo Audio gets out of customs, because the United States government thinks that the Allo Audio are some sort of dangerous item that cannot be distributed to me. Finally, I told you that I got the Cord Mojo, and I've been waiting for it. It was supposed to be delivered today. You know what happened? I got this notification from USPS. Hey, it's delivered. I go to my mailbox, not there. I checked USPS's website again. They're like, oh, it was given to an individual. I'm quoting what they said. Given to an individual. Who? I was here. It wasn't given to me. I looked around. Wasn't my neighbors. I knocked on doors. Nobody had. Who got it? So once again, USPS fails. Failure again. I don't get it. The USPS is outdated. More failure than success from USPS. Anyway, hopefully we will hunt this thing down and find it, because I am going to blow my top if I don't. Very upsetting. Anyway, have a wonderful night, everybody. It's Wednesday. Wednesday's almost over. It's Thursday, and it'll be Friday, and then you have the weekend. It'll be real smooth going from there, hopefully. Have a wonderful night, and I will talk to you soon.